Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. I'm Reverend Dr. Gabe Salguero, President of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, and I want to welcome everyone to this second session of the Evangelical Immigration Table, Evangelical Convening on Immigration. Thank you so much for investing part of your day for this most important conversation. I am sure you will be deeply informed from the panelists that we have here. I want to speak briefly about NALEC, or the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, our commitment to immigration reform. We are one of the members of the Evangelical Immigration Table, and for over a decade, we've been fighting for bipartisan, humane, and comprehensive immigration reform, together with all of our partners and friends on the Evangelical Immigration Table and beyond. Today, our conversation will focus mostly on policy and how our congregations, networks, denominations can speak to immigration policy, working with immigrants and immigration reform. A little about the Evangelical Immigration Table before we begin. The Evangelical Immigration Table is a coalition of evangelical denominations and organizations seeking to encourage distinctly biblical approaches to immigrants and immigration, both within our congregations and networks and in terms of U.S. immigration policy. Since we've launched in 2012, the table's policy priorities have been defined by the Evangelical Statement of Principles for Immigration Reform, which I recommend you read on our page, a statement that has been affirmed by a broad range of national evangelical leaders, local pastors, that leads hopefully to bipartisan immigration reform. Those principles are: 1, respects that God-given dignity of every single person. 2, protects the unity of the immediate family. 3, respecting the rule of law. 4, guarantees secure national borders. 5, ensures fairness to taxpayers. And 6, establishes a path toward legal status and or citizenship for those who qualify and who wish to become permanent residents. And so we commend those principles to you for your reading at your leisure to share with your churches and networks. At this time, I'd like to introduce my fellow co-host, Joy from the CCCU. Joy, take it away.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you. My name is Joy Mosley, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, the CCCU. So I'd like to share a little bit about the CCCU and then what we're going to be hearing today in our panel discussion. So first, the CCCU is a higher education association made up of Christian colleges all around the world. We have about 180 colleges globally and around 140 in the US. We represent about 445,000 current students and about 3.5 million alumni. So we represent Christian higher education interest to Congress, to the White House, and in the courts. And we advocate on issues that are particularly relevant to our students and our campuses, one of those issues being immigration. So the CCCU is a founding member of the EIT, and we support the comprehensive immigration issues that Gabe just read out, as well as focusing specifically on things that matter to our students and our institutions. Things like a path for citizenship for Dreamers and DACA recipients, international students. Even though student visas are non-immigrant visas, we've had to advocate pretty hard to allow international students to be able to come to the US and seek the institution that best fits them, which may be a Christian college. So one thing that I'd like to talk about today is a little bit about the panel that you're going to be hearing. We're going to be exploring Evangelical's immigration policy priorities, which is particularly important just one day after the new president has been inaugurated and as a new Congress has recently been sworn in. Last month, the EIT table leaders prepared an immigration policy agenda for the new Congress and new administration, which applies these longstanding biblical principles to some of the current policy issues affecting immigrants. So we encourage folks to find and review that document on our website, the EIT's website. So after this first conversation, we're going to be breaking up into small groups based on region of the country for strategy sessions to focus on how evangelicals in different states can collaborate to help encourage their members of Congress to pursue bipartisan immigration legislation in line with our priorities. So I want to really emphasize that we want everyone to join for these sessions because we feel like there's momentum right now. There's momentum for immigration reform, but it needs to be bipartisan and needs to take into account the longstanding policy priorities that we've talked about. Also, during the panel discussion, we'll have a Q&A feature where you can submit questions, and we're going to try to respond to as many questions as we can given a limited time frame. So Gabe, I'll turn it back over to you to introduce the next panel.
Thank you, Joy, and thanks to the CCCU for being part of this illustrious network. I want to first introduce Galen Carey, Reverend Dr. Galen Carey, Vice President of Government Relations for the National Association of Evangelicals. He's going to be one of our panelists. We will also have Mr. Nate Bolt. He's the Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for Bethany Christian Services. Ms. Liz Dung, the co-founder of Voices of Christian Dreamers. Mr. Travis Wusall, Vice President for Public Policy and General Counsel, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. And Ms. Jenny Yang, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Policy for World Relief. We have a distinguished panel of men and women who've been working for over a decade on this issue. So welcome, sisters and brothers, to this panel. My first question I'd like to ask for each of you in 1 or 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your personal story and why you're involved or your organization is involved in this work on immigration reform. We'll begin with Galen Carey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you so much for joining this very important conversation. I have the honor to serve as the Vice President for Government Relations with the National Association of Evangelicals, which represents 40 denominations. Probably a lot of you are members of churches that are part of the NAE, and a whole range of other organizations and ministries and networks. We've been working on immigration issues for a long time. Personally, before coming to the NAE, I worked with World Relief for 26 years, about half that time working with refugees and immigrants here in the US and the other half overseas, working with people in poverty and helping churches respond to their needs. And in my personal life, even before that, I grew up as a missionary kid in the Philippines. So I had the experience of being a foreigner and having to get visas and get our visas renewed and going in for interviews and all these things, and seeing how bureaucracies sometimes work and sometimes don't. So that, I think that's given me an extra bit of concern, along with what the Bible has to say. And then finally, I'm a pastor as well in a church planter with a small congregation, multicultural, and that's part of the Anglican Church in North America. And we have, among our small group, we have an asylum seeker who's been waiting about 4 years now for his case to be processed.
Thank you, Galen. Travis, won't you chime in about your organization and your work and why you're part of this?
Yeah, sure, Gabe. Thanks for the intro. My name is Travis Wusso. I lead the ERLC's public policy or DC office. The ERLC is the public policy and ethics organization for the Southern Baptist Convention. We have about 46,000 churches and around 15.2 million Southern Baptists around the country. And we've been a part of this work at the Evangelical Immigration Table from the beginning and have been drawn to this work. This is the concern around our broken immigration system is one that Southern Baptists have been engaged with for nearly 20 years, speaking to these issues and advocating for a just solution to our broken system. On a personal note, my background is in community development and have done a lot of work with immigrant communities in my home state, the great state of Texas. And so this is an issue not just that our organization works on, which it is, it's a priority for us, but also one that means a great deal to me personally.
Thank you, Travis. Liz, why don't you share your work and why you're part of this effort?
Yeah, thank you, Gabe. Thank you all for being here. So I, as mentioned, I founded the Voices of Christian Dreamers a few years back as a platform to help share, highlight stories of faith among immigrants, among dreamers, and then also to provide resources, educational resources, advocacy resources for the church to be engaged in this issue. And for me, my own advocacy work in this space really extends out of my own immigrant journey. I was born in China and came to the US as a 10-year-old under my mom's work visa at the time. But due to errors on our attorney's part and then circumstances that were beyond our control, I ended up losing my status as a 12-year-old, even though we didn't do anything to break US immigration laws. And so have since then sort of lived the life as an undocumented immigrant and struggled with it. All of the implications, restrictions, and the shame and the stigma that accompanies that. But I also realized as someone who is a product of the church welcoming the stranger, coming from a non-faith background, an atheist family background, and having come to know Jesus Christ here in the US, that God has really worked through my own immigrant journey to allow me to come to know him better. So my heart is really for the church, especially people of faith, to be instruments of grace and to help more people come to know Jesus' love, right? The way that I have been welcomed into the kingdom by the church.
Thank you, Liz. Jenny Yang from World Relief.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Vice President for Advocacy and Policy at World Relief, which is the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals, and our mission is to empower the local church to serve the most vulnerable. We work in 14 countries around the world, and in the US, we resettle refugees and serve immigrants in 17 communities across the United States. So my story is a bit interesting as well, in that I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents immigrated to Philadelphia from South Korea back in the late 1970s, and that story of migration has always shaped not only my childhood, but my understanding of who God is. My parents are fervent believers. They attend a now large Korean Presbyterian church in Northwest Philly. And I always was able to experience God and understand more of his love for me through God's faithfulness to my family and my parents' migration story. And so being a bicultural American, of understanding or learning 2 languages and eating several different types of food in my household, and now raising children who are biracial in that they're half Korean and half Chinese, has led to many interesting conversations, but always a desire on our part to instill a pride in their heritage and their cultural and ethnic identity. And so it's been an ongoing journey for me, but I'm really proud and hopeful today in the work that we have ahead of us, because I think as much as administrations are changing and the president has changed, I think the work of the church to really educate and mobilize our communities to serve immigrants and to use words and language that affirm the dignity of immigrants is going to be a really important task for us in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, Jenny. And now Nate from Bethany Christian Service.
Hey, everyone. It's so great to be with you this afternoon. If you're on the East Coast, as Dr. Salguero said, my name is Nate Bolt. I'm the Senior Vice President of Public and Government Affairs at Bethany Christian Services. And at Bethany, we have a historic mission. It's 75 years old, and it is to demonstrate the love and compassion of Jesus to vulnerable children, youth, and families. Sometimes that's children and families who are in the United States. Sometimes it is people who have been displaced to the United States because of violence or conflict in their home countries. And we also have a presence in about a half dozen countries around the world, working with vulnerable children and families. We resettle refugees. We provide care and foster homes in partnerships with Christian churches for unaccompanied children and unaccompanied refugee minors, those children who have come to the United States without their parents. I have been with Bethany for about 3 years and working in government affairs and in advocacy. Before that, I worked at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the executive branch of the U.S. government, and also did 7 years on Capitol Hill, more specifically in the House of Representatives. I've always been passionate about immigration issues, but if there's one thing I learned, especially in the year 2018, it's that proximity matters. And I know we're going to talk about a host of issues throughout this panel, but if there's one moment that stands out to me, it's when I sat down and helped a 2-year-old boy color a picture of a turtle. And this 2-year-old boy had been separated from his father. And I realized that I was not supposed to be the one sitting next to him. It should have been his dad. So look forward to having those conversations about how policies impact people.
Thank you, Nate, and thank all of you. We're going to get right to it. I want to remind everyone who's listening that they can put their questions in the question part of the chat. That we have some people monitoring that, and if we don't answer it in the initial portion, at least somebody will be monitoring and trying to respond to as many as we can, as soon as we can. So let's begin. Yesterday was a transition, and the Biden administration began with a list of executive orders and also a proposal for an immigration reform bill for the 117th Congress. And so a lot of people want to know how you'd like to respond to the new administration's proposals and the series of executive orders. Remember that pastors may not know what all they are and what those policy implications mean for their churches and their communities. And so the initial question is the executive orders and the immigration reform bill. How would you, your organization, and the table look at that at this present moment as it stands? Let's begin with Travis.
Yes, sure. So, I mean, I think our view on it is it's a great start. We're very encouraged to see constructive leadership coming from the White House on this. As with anything related to immigration, it's all about the details, and so we look forward to digging into that. But I think, fundamentally, this is an area where the president can help to ease some of the strain on our system, and we were excited to see a number of the executive orders that were released. But fundamentally, this is an issue where Congress has to act to reform our laws. And so I will just say I'm grateful that there will be pressure from the White House to get something done. That's not something that we've had for the last few years.
Jenny, would you like to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think we're really encouraged that President Biden took immediate action to actually halt some of the immigration processes that were really harming a lot of immigrant communities. There was a rescission of the Muslim or African ban that suspended travel of some nationalities from coming to the U.S. There was also protection of the Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, the DACA program that helps Dreamers, and also a stop on a moratorium on deportations, as well as a stop to the construction of the border wall. So these are all not just symbolic measures, but really tangible measures that we believe will impact a lot of immigrants for the better in the next several weeks to come.
Galen?
Yes, I think we're particularly encouraged that the legislation would address some key challenges that our immigration system faces. One of those being clearing up backlogs in legal immigration. So many family members are waiting for years to be able to reunite, as I'm sure many of you are personally aware from people that you know. So that would be, well, many of those backlogs would be cleared up, or at least the process would be sped up. Then there would be, of course, a provision for undocumented people who pass certain requirements to be able to obtain a temporary legal status and then eventually to earn citizenship. And special provisions for the Dreamers and others who have served in the military and so on. So all in all, I think it's, as Travis and others have said, a good start to the conversation. And what we need now is for people in the Congress to take this seriously, give it the attention it needs, and for the administration to work closely with them, because we know that for something to actually pass, it will need both the administration and the Congress working together in a bipartisan way.
Thank you, Galen. Liz and Nate, in that order, if there's anything you want to add that we may have not missed, both about the executive orders or the proposal from the administration and Congress's responsibility or possible responses.
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly as someone who is personally impacted by the policies that are being proposed. I think I'm very encouraged, right, to see, certainly very excited at the possibility. But as has been stated, I hope that the Biden administration will work across the aisle with members of Congress to really get something passed, right? This is a comprehensive and a very ambitious a bill, policy proposal. And I just hope that we can get something passed that doesn't just look good on paper, right, but that could ultimately become law.
I'll add that, I think one thing you'll hear the panelists repeating today is that Congress needs to act and the administration needs to show leadership. And so far in the first 25 hours of this administration, they've done that. They have submitted a bill to Congress for their consideration. And that prioritization from the administration is incredibly important. I'll highlight 3 provisions that you may not have heard about in the news, but that directly impact children and families that were from that bill. First is they would fund alternative to detention case management programs. What does this mean? It means that asylum-seeking families won't have to spend time together in detention if they are not a threat to the American people. That's a win for families. Second, it establishes a program they're calling the Central American Minors Program, so that children who are in dangerous situations in Central America can be reunified with family in the United States without having to take that dangerous journey to the US. Third, we know, especially as Christians, that words matter. And for me, one of the most painful words that's in US immigration law is the word alien. No one is an alien. We are all children made in the image of God. This bill removes the word alien from all of the US immigration code and replaces it with the term non-citizen. So I'm excited about the changes that are on the table and hope that the administration works with Congress to take action in a bipartisan fashion.
Thank you. Look, a lot of the questions coming in are about the Evangelical Immigration's table stance. It's been called by some a middle road, a middle of the road that's neither amnesty nor mass deportation. It's trying to reconcile both the rule of law and hospitality. What do we say as the Evangelical Immigration Table? We've outlined a restitution-based legislation process or proposal. How is it that we can, because the statement overwhelming is we want something that can pass Congress and get to the president's desk to be signed. How do we look at these reform efforts, since we've been doing it under President Bush and former President Bush, former President Obama, that have failed to become law? How do we explain this to pastors, this middle of the road approach that tries to reconcile and get deep bipartisan support? And how does that get communicated to our partner churches? We'll begin with Galen and then Jenny.
So a lot of people get stuck on this question of amnesty, and so that they want to know, don't immigrants have to acknowledge that they've done something wrong if they came here without the proper legal documents? And so, yes, we think that is appropriate. And so in our statement and our principles, we say that, yes, those who would like to obtain legal and permanent resident status and eventually citizenship, they need to first acknowledge that they've done something wrong, and there should be some consequence for that. And the payment of a penalty or fine is, in our minds, an appropriate way to do that. We should recognize that there are understandable reasons for people coming here. We understand if we were in the position of needing to find a way to feed our families or to escape from persecution, we would do the same thing, most likely. And we also need to recognize that we don't have presently an adequate legal mechanism to accommodate people who come here for any of those reasons, for either for work or for family unification or for protection from persecution. So we think if we allow people to say, yes, we did do something wrong, but we want to make ourselves right with the laws. Almost every immigrant that I've ever met wants to do. They want to make themselves right with the law. And so we need legislation that gives them a way to actually do that.
I would say I think the theme of restitution is going to be an important one as we in the church carry on conversations around immigration, because restitution simply means for an individual to reconcile with the wrong that has been committed. And I think when you look at our immigration laws, it is so complex. We have a lot of families that have been in the US for over a decade that are just waiting for some kind of legal way to continue to be with their families. And I think for the ability for us to say that restitution can take on many forms, what we're asking for is a pathway forward. It's up to our legislators to decide the nuances and the details of that is going to be critically important. And so I think for us as the church to believe in the idea of restitution and that framework is going to be important. And I think the need for us to continue to call our members to work out those details is what we're asking them to do.
I'll open it up if anyone wants to speak about the restitution-based approach that we're doing and the viability of bipartisan support on that issue. Now, let me ask another question that is coming both from the floor and from several people. How can our churches, institutions, denominations, colleges, individual Christians best advocate for just and compassionate policies without becoming partisan? And so I think the gist of the question here is we don't want to become partisan, but we want to be true to our evangelical biblical principles that honor both the law and humane practices in policies. How do we help churches become advocates for that in ways that are transpartisan or non-partisan? And I'll begin with Liz and then Travis.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think really we try to emulate what Jesus did. To start, Jesus was a political figure, right? Jesus engaged with the political leaders of his day, and he advocated for policies that, or type of conditions, right, that would serve the well-being of people, especially those who are marginalized. So I think that's, for us as Christians, that's our starting point. And I think what's important is really learning about the issue, learning and taking in the facts and the resources which the Evangelical Immigration Table and its partners, including Voices of Christian Dreamers as well, that we've put out to help people really just understand from a pure facts perspective, understanding that immigrants, undocumented immigrants, the vast majority of them pay taxes, right? That's something that a lot of people don't know. And then it's taking steps to engage with political leaders from both parties in advocating, speaking up on policies that you think are consistent with biblical values, right? Whether it's a stance that the EIT has taken, perhaps more personified, modified by your own beliefs and values, but it's communicating that. And it's also engaging with legislators, lawmakers in a respectful manner, and then also bringing people alongside, helping to educate those in your immediate circles of influence on this issue, highlighting the stories of immigrants and refugees and TPS holders themselves.
Yeah, I think I would just to add to that, I think one of the things that we have got to reclaim as we're thinking about political engagement is that the days that happen in between election days are just as important as what we do in the voting booth. And so, I think particularly for pastors, it would not be difficult for you as a pastor to build a relationship with one or both of your senators, with your House member. You represent a lot of people, and they're interested in knowing what you think. And so, I think taking advantage of town halls, walking up, sticking around, and actually building a relationship with your elected officials is crucial. So I think I'd sort of mention that as a starting point. There's a great question here about blue states. What happens if you're living in a blue state? How do you encourage, or what role can you have in bringing Republicans along? And I would just say that a bipartisan solution means that folks from both parties are going to have to be a part of this, which means that Democrats are going to have to give up some of the things that perhaps they might want in order to get Republicans on board. And so, I think it's crucial for us as members of the faith community to not just come to our elected officials when we have something that we want them to do, but also to reward them for the good behavior that we hope to see, which in this case is going to require everybody making some compromise. So, when elected officials are hearing from pastors and members of their community who are happy because of the bipartisan work that they're doing, it will stick out, because most of the calls are going to be coming from a more partisan angle. So I just encourage you to build relationships and reward constructive behavior.
Nate, is there anything you'd like to add on that question?
I used to be the person on the other end of those phone calls, and I can promise you that as a former congressional staff member, members of Congress do care what people in their district think. We used to provide weekly reports to my boss about who was calling in from the district and about what issues. And as Travis mentioned, most of the comments were very, very polarized. So comments that did advocate for bipartisan solutions, and callers, frankly, that were kind, and especially faith leaders, we highlighted those for my boss. He wanted to hear those. So I encourage you, build relationships not only with the member of Congress, but with their staff too. They're the gatekeepers.
We have a few questions, and I'm going to put them together, and then I'll just open the mics as you feel led. That's the Pentecostal in me, as you feel led. That's the language we use in our tradition. We have one from Bishop Carlos Moran from the Church of God, and his question is about what, if anything, in the executive orders or in the immigration proposal is the Biden administration, I'm going to list several questions, so please, planning to do with the about 500 children who were separated from their families. Does the proposal or any of the executive orders address that? It's number one. The second thing is questions of future flow. How do we get the issue of humane path to citizenship or path to legalization, as our proposal has indicated, while dealing with issues of future flow? So that's the second one, with the children, the unaccompanied children, the other about future flow in a bipartisan manner. I think that those are two of the questions that have been talked about. The last thing is, how do we talk about restitution in ways that are not onerous or bar a path to legalization or citizenship? Have we talked about that in significant manners? And so I'll open it. You can speak to one, all three, as your expertise and experience has done.
Well, this is Galen. One of the executive orders sets up a task force that is charged with reuniting the families from the separated children. That's going to be a very challenging job because they don't know where these people are. But there will be a group that will be tasked with working on that. So we think that's important. I think we need to pray for them, because these children have been growing up without their parents and after being separated in extremely traumatizing ways.
And I'll add to that the US government knows where these children are. And most of them have been released to sponsors, usually family members or friends who are in the United States. They don't know where their parents are. So these parents were returned to their country of origin, primarily Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And the US government did not track where those parents went. They don't know where they are today. And so the Biden administration has directed their agencies to use every resource available to them, primarily the Departments of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services, to try to find these parents and reunify their families. I'll echo what Galen said. Prayers are needed for not only those who remain separated, but for those who are trying to reunify them.
Yeah, regarding just the second question around what is Congress and the administration going to do around future flow or immigration, I think the immigration bill that Senator Menendez is going to lead in the Senate, that the Biden administration has now been working with them on, is really considered an immigration light proposal. And by that, I mean they're trying to tackle some of the immediate needs that are in our immigration system around DACA, around those who are here undocumented, and a pathway towards citizenship, and those kinds of issues that have really been kind of at the forefront of a lot of our immigration conversations. And I think that the conversations around future flow and how to reform our current legal immigration system, family-based immigration and employment-based immigration is to be determined. I think once there is movement on some of these issues that are at the forefront of our minds around this current immigration bill, at a later point, it is believed that the administration will then tackle what future flow actually looks like. And so I think it's important to know that this is not going to be this huge comprehensive effort that addresses every part of immigration and the system that is broken, but it will tackle certain issues first and then look towards tackling others later on. But again, I think that your voice being included in those conversations is going to be very important in the weeks to come.
Let me, if no one has anything to add, let me talk about in the last few minutes, because then there's going to be another session where we can maybe do a deeper dive between our states or the areas that we represent. Let me talk about two things. The Evangelical Immigration Table talks about a biblically based approach, right? Or a gospel-centered approach is sometimes how it's referred to. Two things I would like to say. What are the biblical or scriptural texts that inform you as you approach this, and or maybe biblical general models or narratives or principles that inform your approach? And then the second one is much more practical. What is your level of optimism or pessimism that to moving forward on this? And given that response, what can the people on this call? So the last thing is the call to action. So again, scripture, your level of optimism, and a call to action to all the men and women who are on the call. And let's begin with the one I've never begun with, Nate, and then Liz, and then we'll open it up.
Sure, scripture. John 13:35. That to me is the underpinning of advocacy and what we do. And it's, in my opinion, one of the most underrated things that Christ said in scripture. And he said, when his disciples asked how the world will know they're his followers, he replied, by your love. So no matter what the contentious issue is that we're discussing, try to do so from a posture of love. Level of optimism, that's probably the hardest question to address. I think back to 2014 when Congress was trying to pass the Gang of Eight bill. And this is one of my biggest regrets as a Hill staffer. I sat down with a group of immigration advocates. I was pretty fresh to the Hill, a few years in at this point, and I was confident that this was going to pass. And I made a promise to those advocates that immigration reform would get done in 2014. Well, here we are in 2021 discussing the same subject, and I could not have been more wrong. So I will never make a promise about legislation again. However, I am optimistic about the momentum. And we need all of the people who are on this call, all of us who are panelists, to keep that momentum going.
And for me, in terms of scripture, I think of Matthew 25, when Jesus identifies himself with the least of these, that whatever you do to the least of these, including caring for the stranger, welcoming the stranger, that you do it as unto the Lord. And the opposite is true, that when you neglect the stranger, you neglect the Lord. And just looking at Jesus' life himself, right, that he didn't just care about the spiritual needs of people. Obviously, it's very important, but he also fed the hungry. In terms of optimism, similar to kind of what Nate said, I felt like throughout the years, throughout the almost over a decade, it's been a roller coaster of emotions, high and lows, of seeing something about to happen, near passing, but it doesn't. So I think I've, in some sense, moderated my excitement, trying to be cautiously optimistic about what's going to happen. but I am hopeful in terms of what can be done under the Biden administration. And I really hope that regardless of party, that the legislators can come together and find common ground. And I think my call to those who are here, my fellow panelists, is really, I think the starting point is getting to know that immigrant, right, that refugee in your community. And once you come to love this person, this family, then their struggles, their issues will become your own. And I think it will be natural, and it's an extension of your Christ-like love to them and discipleship to advocate. Yeah, so I just encourage all of us to do that.
We have about another minute before we go to break. So if anyone wants to add a response to that, and then I'll give some.
Yeah, so let me just say this to all of our friends on this call. There's more than 300 of us all together. So I think in some ways what happens depends in part on what each of us does. And keep in mind that it's not only the position that you take, but the intensity with which you pursue it. In any issue that the Congress deals with, some people have more influence than others. And it's not just that you have more money, it's that if you have more passion and energy and you're willing to work on it harder, it's more likely that something good will be done. So I exhort, encourage, invite each of you, tell your friends, and then get people organized and engaged. This is a good time to do it because there is some momentum building, as we've said. And then by God's grace, we pray that something positive can be done in this Congress for immigrants.
All of us would have so much more to say, but I saw Travis unmute his mic, so I'll give him the last.
Can I just jump in real quick? Thank you. I completely agree with what Galen said. I just wanted to sharpen the point and say I really am optimistic. I mean, I don't know whether we'll be able to get a bill passed this year, but we are going to make progress this year on moving this forward. There's no doubt about that. But I think as what Galen said is exactly right. How much progress we make and whether we're actually able to get bills passed that solves one or all of these problems, it depends on what you do. And you know, it's facing down really tough challenges like this that I always think about a quote from one of my heroes, the president of IJM, Gary Haugen, and what we have it up on our bulletin board at our office. And what he said was, there are some victories reserved for those who refuse to go away. So let's not go away. Let's get into the fight. It's going to be tough. There's going to be some ups and downs, but I know that we can make progress this year if we push for it.
With that said, I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists, all of the more than 300 persons who have joined us from all over the country. And I want to commend the stick-to-itiveness that Travis and IJM have commended us to. The struggle is real, but Luke 18 says the widow was persistent and the judge responded to her. So thank each of you. There will be more information coming forward. And for that, I yield to my colleague, Joy Mosley from the CCCU. Thank you, distinguished panelists, and thank you all. There's another part coming up you don't want to miss because this information is vital to mobilize the church in the United States. Joy?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for a great discussion. In a few moments, we're going to be splitting out into various regional strategy sessions. There's a saying that all politics is local, and so we want to encourage evangelicals in particular states to collaborate together to be a positive influence on their elected officials, particularly as they're resuming debates on immigration policy soon. I know that sometimes it can be tempting to just leave, but please don't. Please find the appropriate strategy session, which you can go to evangelicalimmigrationtable.com/breakouts, where it'll also be posted in the chat. But before we do that, I want to talk about a few different things. Many of you have asked about what you can be doing. And so there's a few things you can be doing. One is to add your name to 2 different statements. So there's an evangelical statement of principles for immigration reform, which we launched in 2012, and it's garnered support of thousands of prominent evangelical leaders, local pastors, and lay people. And then there's also another statement, the Evangelical Call for Restitution-Based Immigration Reform. And as Gabe mentioned earlier, this elaborates on what an earned legalization process could look like that's neither amnesty nor mass deportation. So the links to that will also be in the chat, and I'd encourage you to consider adding your name to both of those. Another thing you can do, so you've heard this great panel discussion, now you're going into the strategy session and you might be thinking, how can I put this into practice? Well, I'm glad you asked. Right now, you can go ahead and sign up for a virtual meeting with your member of Congress and or his or her staff on February 25th. Please save that date and go register for that meeting. As Nate mentioned, this really matters. These conversations matter. Members hearing from their constituents really does make a difference. So if you're interested in joining, please go to evangelicalimigrationtable.com/February 25th. That link will also be in the chat. And I would really encourage you to register for this virtual conference. It'll be a really important time to build on this momentum. That'll be an opportunity for you to participate in advocacy. The last thing that I want to note before we break into the strategy sessions is to remind you to join next week. Next week, Thursday, January 28th, is our final session of the Evangelical Convening on Immigration. We're going to focus on the theme of faith, work, economics, and immigration, exploring the role that immigrants play in the U.S. economy and the ways that our Christian faith can guide our thinking about work. So if you're joining us today, you should already be registered for next week's conversation, but we love your help in encouraging others to join. All right, now you can go ahead and follow the link posted in the chat to break out into strategy sessions, or you can also go to evangelicalimigrationtable.com/breakouts. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the breakout sessions.